The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was standing at the kitchen window of my apartment on Federal Street in Pittsburgh, watching rain drag itself down the glass above Mr. Kareem's grocery store awning, when the number appeared on my screen. A Boston area code. A law firm name I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Men in my position learn early that unexpected calls from lawyers rarely carry good news. But I answered. By the time I hung up 12 minutes later, the rain outside looked the same. The traffic below sounded the same. And everything inside my chest had changed completely. The woman I had once called my wife was dead. The funeral had already been held, privately, at her request. And now, her attorney was telling me that I needed to come to Boston for the reading of her will. She had left instructions that I be present. After 13 years, after everything that woman had cost me, she still had the power to summon me across state lines with a single phone call. And here is the part that should tell you everything you need to know about the kind of man I am. The kind of man I was forced to become. I said yes. I said yes, without asking why. Without demanding an explanation, without making her attorney earn the answer to why a woman who had destroyed my life wanted me in a room after she was gone to hear what she had done with her money. I just said yes, hung up the phone, and sat down on the old kitchen chair I had pulled from a sidewalk 11 years earlier, and I let the rain keep falling. Before we go any further into what happened in that conference room, subscribe and stay with me. Because what I am about to tell you is not a simple story about money or inheritance or a dead woman's final wishes. It is a story about what a father will sacrifice in silence and what the truth costs when it arrives 13 years too late. My name is Henrik Vasquez. I was 63 years old at the time of that phone call. I lived in a 500-square-foot apartment above a grocery store, and I delivered prepared food orders for a catering company on the north side of Pittsburgh. Honest work, quiet work. The kind of work a man takes when the world has already decided who he is and locked the decision in place with a federal conviction. 13 years earlier, I had been a different man in a different city, living a different kind of life entirely. Senior partner at a respected wealth management firm in Boston. Tailored suits. Client meetings in restaurants where the menus had no prices. Families who trusted me with the money their grandparents had left them. Portfolios large enough to make other advisors nervous. I had built my practice from 3 modest accounts I had carried over from a regional bank in my early 30s. 23 years later, I was trusted with the kind of money people build dynasties around. Then the federal investigation started. I will not take you through every detail of those 18 months. The subpoenas, the frozen accounts, the firm placed under regulatory review, the junior partners who distanced themselves before the first newspaper article even ran. I will only tell you this. By the time the trial began, the story was already written. Respected Boston investment advisor steals $14 million from client trust accounts. Greed. Betrayal. Another man who smiled through handshakes while reaching into someone else's future. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury needed less than 1 day. My attorney, Nathaniel Price, had known me for nearly 20 years. He had been at my daughter's 10th birthday party. He had sat at my Thanksgiving table. He had watched me build that firm from nothing, account by account, decade by decade, with a discipline that left no room for the kind of recklessness the prosecution was describing. He believed he could win. He told me the evidence had gaps. The transfers had been made through my login credentials, yes, but the timing, the access logs, the device history, none of it cleanly proved that I personally initiated them. He said, "Give me a jury. Give me reasonable doubt. That is all I need." And I told him to enter the guilty plea. He slammed both hands on the conference table hard enough that his pen skidded off the edge. The junior associates in the hallway pretended not to hear. "Henrik," he said, "this is insane." I remember looking at him through the glass wall of that conference room. The way the light caught the side of his face. The way he was looking at me like a man watching someone walk toward a cliff with both eyes open. "No," I said. "Then tell me why." I could not. Because telling him why would have handed him a truth with legs. And once that truth had legs, it would walk into a courtroom, into newspapers, into my daughter's future, and sit there permanently, visible to everyone who had ever known her name. So I stayed quiet. The judge asked whether I understood the consequences of my plea. I said yes. The prosecutor described me as calculated, selfish, and remorseless. I sat still and let her. My former wife sat 3 rows behind me, wearing black, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face arranged into the careful expression of a grieving woman who had barely survived her husband's disgrace. And my daughter sat beside her, believing every single word. I did not steal that money. I need you to understand that before you understand anything else that follows. I did not move it, I did not hide it, I did not spend a single dollar of it or touch it in any way, but I also did not defend myself when the moment came to do so. I did not stand up in that courtroom and speak the name of the person who had actually done it. I let them put the handcuffs on me. I let the cameras catch my face outside the courthouse. I let strangers read my name over morning coffee and make their decision about the kind of man I was. And I let my daughter hate me. Sienna was 19 years old when I was arrested. She had just been accepted into a graduate program at Wharton. She had recommendation letters. She had professors who believed in her. She had a clean, promising life waiting on the other side of that acceptance letter, and her name was still attached to mine. My wife had come to me the night I discovered what she had done. This is what her attorney's letter eventually confirmed, but I am telling you the part I knew that night, alone in our kitchen on Beacon Hill, while winter dark pressed flat against the windows. For months before my arrest, my wife had been hiding a debt. Not ordinary debt. She had made private investments through a man named Auberon Welsh, a polished, soft-voiced financial operator who wore expensive suits and knew how to make desperate people feel chosen. By the time she understood what he actually was, she owed him just over $14 million. She had hidden every dollar of it from me. She had carried it through our house, across the dinner table, through good morning kisses and evening conversations. She had looked at me for months with clear eyes and said nothing, while that number sat behind her face like a stone. Then Welsh began threatening her. Not loudly. Men like that rarely need to raise their voices. He threatened reputation. He threatened exposure. He threatened to drag her name, our daughter's name, and my firm into a scandal that would destroy every room we had ever been welcome in. So she panicked, and she used me. She had access to my office, my computer, my login credentials, the small private details of a husband who had never once imagined his wife would turn his trust into a weapon against him. Over 3 days, she moved the money, $14 million, transferred from a client trust account, traced entirely through my credentials. When I found out, I came home, took off my coat, and sat at the kitchen table. And I asked her one question. Does Sienna know? Not how could you do this? Not what have you done to me? Not whether we could fix it, recover it, survive it. Does Sienna know? Because Sienna was 19. Her life was still clean. A scandal of this size, connected to her mother, would not stay with her mother. It would follow Sienna into every interview, every fellowship, every room where serious people made decisions about who belonged. Newspapers do not protect the daughters of women who steal $14 million from a wealthy Boston firm. They print photographs and let readers fill in the rest. But if I took the blame, the story became simpler. One man, one crime, one disgrace. My daughter's name stayed out of it. I made that decision alone, at the kitchen table, while my wife cried in the next room, and winter held the house quiet around both of us. I decided that my life was already over. My firm, my reputation, my career. Once the transfers were discovered, once the investigation reached my credentials, the damage was already done, regardless of who had moved the money. But Sienna's life was not over. So I chose silence, and I went to prison. I served 11 years and 4 months at FCI Schuylkill in Pennsylvania. Sienna came to see me once. 3rd month inside, I still remember that visiting room with a precision that feels almost like a punishment. The steel table bolted to the floor, the plastic chairs, the vending machine humming in the corner, the fluorescent lights that made every face look slightly wrong. I had told myself that when she walked in, something in her would recognize me. Not the defendant, not the name from the newspapers, her father. She walked in like someone arriving to confirm a death. She was 22 by then. She was wearing a dark coat I had bought her the winter before everything collapsed. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her voice when she finally spoke was a temperature I had never heard from her before. "I changed my last name," she said. I nodded because I did not trust myself to speak. "Mom told me everything." That sentence carried the full weight of what had been constructed around me while I sat in a cell. My wife had not simply stayed silent. She had not merely allowed Sienna to believe the charges. She had given our daughter a complete story. A detailed one. A father with secret greed. A husband who had lied for years. A man who had smiled through birthday parties and school ceremonies while stealing from people who had trusted him. She invented that man and handed him to our daughter and called him me. "I'm ashamed," Sienna said. "I'm ashamed I ever called you my father." Her voice broke on the second time she said ashamed. And I almost told her the truth. I was that close. I could feel the words forming, could feel what it would cost me, and what it would cost her, and what it would cost my wife, and I stayed silent. Because I still believed the lie protected her. I let my daughter leave that visiting room. I let her walk out of my life for 11 years. And I sat alone in that steel chair for a long time after, telling myself I had made the right choice. That was the price of silence, and I had already paid it before the worst of it arrived. The morning I left for Boston, I stood in front of my closet and looked at everything I owned that could pass for respectable. It did not take long. One charcoal gray suit hung from a bent wire hanger, wrapped in the thin plastic bag from the Goodwill on McKnight Road. I had bought it 2 winters earlier for $19 because Mr. Kareem's wife had passed away, and I needed something decent. The sleeves were short, the shoulders were tired, but it was clean. I packed it into a blue duffel bag with 1 white shirt, 2 pairs of socks, and a pair of polished dress shoes that had belonged to an old man down the hall who died the previous year. His daughter gave them to me while clearing his apartment. They were half a size too big and pinched my heel. I took them without complaint because men in my position learn not to be proud about practical things. I called my supervisor, Bernadette, who had hired me 8 years earlier, without asking why a man my age had no stable employment history and a silence around him that other employers had treated like a warning. "Take whatever you need, Henrik," she said. Her kindness almost undid me. At 6 in the morning, I boarded a flight out of Pittsburgh International. I had not been on an airplane since before my arrest. I kept my eyes down, watching the carpet, telling myself the world had long since moved on from my disgrace. No one on that flight knew who I was. No one was going to recognize the name of a man convicted of financial crimes 11 years earlier in a city 3 states away. I was just an old man in a too-short suit with a duffel bag under his hand, flying towards something he did not have a name for yet. When I landed in Boston, the city looked the same in all the ways that ached. Glass buildings, wet pavement, expensive coats moving past me with purpose. I took the train from the airport, checked into the cheapest hotel I could find near the law firm, and sat on the edge of a bed that smelled like industrial cleaner while the room's single window let in a gray rectangle of Boston sky. Tomorrow I would walk into a conference room with my daughter for the first time in 11 years. And she still believed I had destroyed her family. The law firm occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower on Boylston Street. The lobby smelled of polished stone and fresh flowers, and the quiet confidence of money that never needs to introduce itself. The receptionist led me down a carpeted hallway, lined with framed degrees until we reached a conference room at the far end. Through the glass wall, I saw 3 people already seated at the long table. One of them was Sienna. For a moment, I could not make my feet move. She sat at the far end in a navy suit, posture straight, hands folded in front of her, face composed into the careful stillness of a woman who had spent years mastering her own reactions. Her hair was shorter than I remembered. Her face was thinner. She looked older, but not in the way time usually ages people. She looked carefully constructed, as if every soft part of her had been taught to stay behind glass. Beside her sat her husband, Theron Ashbridge. I had learned his name from a wedding announcement I found years earlier in an old Boston Globe archive at the Pittsburgh Public Library. I had sat at that library terminal for a long time, reading about my daughter's wedding from a newspaper, learning what no father should have to learn that way. He came from old Salem money, private schools, the kind of family that learned to look down without raising its voice. He looked at me exactly that way when I entered the room. The attorney, Adrienne Colrin, stood and introduced herself and gestured toward the empty chair opposite my daughter. I sat down. Sienna did not say hello. She turned to Adrienne and said, with deliberate precision, "I want to be clear that I object to his presence here." "Not him, not my father, his." Adrienne's voice stayed level. "Your mother's instructions were specific and unambiguous. Mr. Vasquez was required to be present." My daughter's jaw tightened once, and we sat across from each other, close enough to hear each other breathe, separated by 11 years and a table bolted to the floor. Adrienne opened the folder. She began with the formal language. The date of execution, the witnesses, the notary, the confirmation of sound mind. Her voice was professional and almost gentle, but I could feel the impatience building across from me. Sienna was waiting for the number. I could read that in her posture, in the slight forward lean, in the way her husband had laid his forearms on the table, as if settling in for something he had already planned. She had been her mother's only child. She had stood beside her mother through my trial, through the divorce, through the long, careful social recovery. In her mind, what was about to be read was not a gift. It was confirmation. It was what she was owed. Then Adrienne read the estimated value of the estate. $192 million. The number filled the room like smoke. Residential properties in Boston and along the North Shore. Stock from the textile import company her grandfather had founded decades earlier. Art collections, investment accounts, charitable trusts, private holdings I had known nothing about during our marriage. Sienna inhaled very quietly. Her husband's fingers tightened once against the table's edge. The charitable bequests came first. $500,000 to the Boston Symphony, $1 million to Dana-Farber, $200,000 to a school in Roxbury, where my former wife had once tutored children on Saturday mornings. Smaller amounts to causes that sounded polished and responsible and impossible to object to. Then the family bequests. My former sister-in-law received the Marblehead house and a portfolio worth approximately $8 million. Sienna sat straighter. Her face went still. She believed the next line would make her wealthy. She had no idea it was about to break her. Adrian lowered her eyes to the page. To my daughter, Sienna Vasquez Ashbridge, she read, I leave the sum of $34. Silence. The kind of silence that arrives when a sentence is too small for the room it just entered, too absurd to decode immediately. Across the table, Sienna did not react for 1 second, maybe 2, as if her mind had refused to translate the words into their actual meaning. Then her lips parted. What? Adrian did not look surprised. That was the moment I understood. She had read this line before, and already knew exactly what it would do when spoken aloud in this room, with these people. The bequest is $34, Adrian said carefully. $1 for each year she was your mother. What happened to Sienna's face in that moment is not something I know how to describe completely. It was not just shock. It was the specific collapse of a person who had arrived somewhere expecting to be confirmed and found, instead, that the ground did not exist. Her husband leaned forward immediately. That is not possible. His voice had shed its polish. There was something raw underneath it now, something frightened. Men like Theron Ashbridge understand money not only as comfort but as architecture. It is the table, the roof, the proof of where they belong, and in one sentence, my dead former wife had cracked the architecture down its center. Sienna's eyes stayed on Adrian. Read the rest, she said. There is no rest of your bequest. No, a whisper. There has to be another paragraph, a trust, a condition, a timeline, something. There is not. The color left her face starting at the corners of her mouth, and I recognized that. When she was small and frightened, the skin around her lips would go pale first. I had not seen that in 20 years. Seeing it now, aimed not at childhood fear, but at the wreckage of an expectation, hurt more than I expected it to. She looked around the conference room as if someone might step forward and correct reality. No one did. Her mother had left her $34, and the explanation for why was still waiting on the next page. Adrian waited until Sienna had stopped speaking. Then she reached into the folder and removed a sealed envelope, thick cream paper. My former wife's handwriting across the front. I recognized it before Adrian said anything. 13 years had passed, but the body holds certain knowledge, the slope of those letters. The way she pressed harder at the end of a word when she was feeling something large. This letter was prepared by your mother, Adrian said to Sienna. Her instructions require that it be read aloud in this room following the primary bequests. Sienna shook her head. I don't want to hear an explanation from a dead woman who just humiliated me. I understand, but these were her legal instructions. Adrian broke the seal. The sound was small, but it felt like a door that had been locked for 13 years finally swinging open. She unfolded 5 handwritten pages and began to read. To my daughter Sienna, and to anyone else present when this will is read. What follows is the truth I should have told a long time ago. I am a coward. I have lived as a coward, and I have allowed another person to carry the full cost of my cowardice for 13 years. Sienna's face changed. Not softened, not opened. Changed the way a face changes when it is about to receive something it cannot refuse. Adrian continued. I am writing this because I will not be alive when it is read. Even now, with the diagnosis I have been given, I cannot find the courage to say these words while I am still here to face what they will cost me. My hands tightened under the table. Then came the sentence. Henrik did not steal that money. I did. Sienna made a sound that was not quite a word. And Adrian kept reading. My former wife wrote that it had begun with a private debt she had hidden from everyone. Investments made through a man named Oberon Welsh, a charming operator who wore good suits and specialized in finding women with money problems and making them feel chosen instead of trapped. By the time she saw him clearly, she owed him just over $14 million. He had begun threatening her, quietly the way men like that prefer. He threatened reputation, exposure, our daughter's name, my firm's standing in the community. So she used what she had access to. My login, my credentials, my computer, the small trusted details of a husband who had never imagined needing to protect himself from his own wife. Over 3 days, she moved the money. And I had spent 11 years and 4 months in a federal prison for it. Adrian turned the page, and I was back in the kitchen on Beacon Hill, in the moment when my life divided itself permanently into before and after. She had written about that night. She had written that when I discovered what she had done, I did not shout. I did not threaten. I did not call the police or my attorney or anyone at all. I came home, took off my coat, and sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and asked her one question. Does Sienna know? She had written that those 3 words destroyed her more than any accusation could have. She wrote that she had watched me sit there while the full weight of what I was deciding settled over me, and she had understood, not immediately, not fully, but in pieces over the weeks that followed, what I was doing. I was not protecting her. I was protecting our daughter. I had looked at the woman who had just gutted my life and decided that the only person whose future still mattered was the child who had nothing to do with any of it. But that was not all she had written to Sienna. This is the part that made the room feel smaller. She admitted she had not simply stayed silent. She had built something. I told you he was guilty, she had written. I told you he had been hiding things from both of us for years. I told you there was greed in him you had been too young to see. I told you the man you loved had never truly existed. Across the table, Sienna's face moved through expressions I could not catalog quickly enough. Recognition, revulsion, something that was not quite grief and not quite rage, but lived between them. She was remembering specific conversations. I could see it. The night after my arrest, when she must have cried into her mother's shoulder and asked how this could be real. The morning the headlines ran. Every quiet conversation in which she had asked a careful question and received an answer shaped like truth. Her mother had not left the lie to stand on its own. She had tended to it, fed it, given it detail and texture. She had built a version of me that was specific enough to hate for a long time. A secretive husband, a greedy advisor, a father who smiled through Sunday dinners while betraying everyone at the table. She invented that man. She handed him to our daughter, and she called him me. For 11 years, Sienna had lived with that invented father as the explanation for why her family collapsed. She had changed her name because of him. She had stayed away from every visiting day because of him. She had received my letters and returned them unopened because of him. She had missed my birthday, my release, the slow gray beginning of my old age. All because her mother needed the lie to breathe. And the letter said it plainly. I let you hate him because I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would hate me. Stay with me, because what this letter reveals next is what I had been carrying alone for 13 years. And hearing it spoken in that conference room changed every version of every memory I had. Adrian turned to the next page. My former wife wrote that she was leaving the estate to me not because money could repair anything. She had not written those words to comfort herself or to purchase forgiveness. She was clear about that. She wrote that she was under no illusion about what $178 million could actually restore. Not 11 years, not my license, not the firm, Not the morning. Sienna looked at me across a steel table and said she was ashamed to carry my name. The estate exists, she wrote, because Henrik paid the price that allowed me to keep living. While he was inside, I was outside. While he was wearing prison clothes, I was attending charity events. While he was being called a criminal, I was being received as the woman who survived her husband's disgrace. She had grown that fortune in the years after my conviction, managed investments, sold assets, acquired property, remained welcome in every room where my name had become a cautionary tale. She had been pitied, protected, praised for her resilience. People had lowered their voices around her. They had admired her for surviving me. And all of it had been built on my silence. The money is not a gift, the letter said. It is not generosity. It is not forgiveness. It is the closest thing I have to a receipt. That word. A receipt. $178 million as a receipt, as an accounting of what had been taken and who had paid for it. That landed harder than the number. It was not wealth. It was evidence. Evidence of every morning I woke up in a federal prison for a crime I did not commit. Every letter returned unopened. Every job application left without a response. Every birthday I spent in silence. Every year my daughter's name existed in the world without mine beside it. Then Adrian read the part meant for Sienna. To my daughter, I leave $34, one for each year I was your mother. It is the only money I can give you that was not purchased with your father's suffering. Sienna's hand came up and covered her mouth, and she understood finally that her inheritance had never been money. It had been a lie she had been living inside. When Adrian finished the last page, no one spoke. Theron Ashbridge stood first. He pushed his chair back with a sound that scraped across the polished floor and walked out of the conference room without looking at his wife. The door closed behind him with the quiet, expensive weight of a man who had just realized his future looked different than the one he had planned. Sienna stayed. Her eyes found mine across the table, and for the first time in 11 years, they were not full of hatred. That did not make them gentler. It made them more broken. Hatred at least gives a person somewhere to stand. What was in her eyes now was worse. The floor had been removed from beneath her, and she was looking at the man she had been taught to despise and realizing he was the only solid thing left in the room. Then she said one word, Dad. Small, almost inaudible, not like a reunion, not like forgiveness, more like something she had buried so deep she had forgotten what her own voice sounded like saying it. I looked at her. She was crying without making any noise, tears sliding down her face the way rain moves on glass, without asking permission. Her hands were trembling on the table. I had known those hands as a child's hands, sticky with popsicle juice, reaching for mine on summer sidewalks. I had held them outside school buildings, outside hospital rooms, outside airports. Then I had spent 11 years not holding them at all. Why? She whispered. I knew what she meant. Why did you let me hate you? Why did you sit in that prison visiting room and say nothing while I called you a disgrace? I took one slow breath. Because you would have had to choose, I said, between your mother and me, and either way you chose, you would have lost. She covered her face with both hands. And I stayed across the table, because crossing the room too quickly would not erase 11 years. Some distances require walking toward slowly, with honesty, and without rushing the other person's grief. Sienna, I said gently, look at me. She lowered her hands. Her face was red, streaked, younger looking than I expected. She looked, for one terrible second, like the little girl who used to climb into my lap on summer evenings and ask whether the stars were people we had lost. I hated you, she said. I know. I said things to you. I remember. I changed my name. I know. I left you there. Her voice broke on that. I shook my head. No. You did what you were given to do with what you were told. That is not a crime. That is a daughter who believed her mother. She stared at me as if she wanted my words to punish her instead of release her. None of this was your fault, I said. Not the trial, not the lie, not the years. I should have known. You were not supposed to know. That was the purpose of the lie. We sat together with 11 years between us, not pretending they had not been stolen. That was enough for that room on that day. I left the law firm before sunset. Adrian walked me to the lobby herself. At the elevator, she held the folder against her chest and looked at me with a careful, genuine sadness. Your former wife cried when she dictated that letter, she said quietly. I thought you should know. I nodded. I had 13 years imagining what it would feel like when the truth finally arrived. I had imagined a courtroom, a newspaper correction, a judge's order, some clean public moment where the world would be required to look back at what it had decided about me and say it had been wrong. But when it actually happened, there was no music in it, no triumph, no feeling of vindication large enough to fill the space where 11 years used to be. Only a tired man in a second-hand suit, standing in a polished lobby, holding the knowledge that the woman who had ruined him had been sorry too late to change what her timing had already cost. I took the train back to the airport and sat by the window while Boston moved past in gray pieces. On the flight to Pittsburgh, I watched the city's lights fall away beneath the wing and tried to feel what I thought I was supposed to feel. Anger, relief, some clean, completed emotion with a name. All I felt was tired, not sleepy, not weak, tired in the bones, the kind of tired that lives in the places where years accumulate when a man survives something he was never built to survive alone. The truth had come out, but 11 years were still gone. In the weeks that followed, attorneys called almost every day. Tax filings, appraisals, account transfers, property documents, signatures witnessed by people who spoke about $178 million the way other people discuss weather. One attorney told me the estate would take months to fully settle. I told him I was not in a hurry. The truth was, I did not know how to be wealthy. I knew how to survive on $22,000 a year. I knew which grocery store marked down bread after 7 in the evening. I knew how to stretch a winter coat one more season, how to take the bus instead of the train, how to live inside a very small life and find it sufficient. But I did not know what to do with a number large enough to change the architecture of everything. So I began small. I gave Bernadette 2 weeks' notice and finished my last Friday at the catering company. That afternoon, I delivered trays of stuffed mushrooms and chicken skewers to a corporate event where no one looked at me twice. When I returned to the kitchen, the staff had signed a card. They thought I had inherited a modest sum from a distant relative. I let them believe it. I ate the last of the leftover food from the warming trays and thought about how many years I had moved through the world invisible and how strange it felt to know that was about to end. Then I bought an apartment 2 blocks from my old one. Not a penthouse. Not anything that would have drawn attention. Just a clean place with a real bedroom, working heat, and a window that faced east. The first morning I woke there, sunlight came through the glass and landed on the floor like something that had simply been waiting for me to be still enough to notice. The rest of the money needed a purpose. With the help of a young Pittsburgh attorney named Marisol Vega, I created a legal defense fund for people accused of federal financial crimes who could not afford adequate representation. Wrongful convictions do not always look dramatic. Sometimes they look like exhausted public defenders, frightened juries, defendants who cannot afford to fight back, and a system that mistakes the inability to defend oneself for guilt. I did not put my name on it. I did not want applause. I wanted the money that had cost me my life to help someone else keep theirs. Sienna came to Pittsburgh the following spring. She came alone. I saw her through the restaurant window before she saw me, standing on the sidewalk in Lawrenceville with one hand wrapped around the strap of her bag. She looked nervous in a way I had not expected. This was a woman who could walk into boardrooms and old money dining rooms without lowering her eyes. But outside that small neighborhood restaurant, she looked like a daughter, afraid she had arrived too late. I stood when she walked in. For a moment, neither of us knew what to do with our hands. Then she said, "Hi, Dad. Not perfect, not easy, but real." We sat in a quiet booth near the back. She told me that she had left finance in her second year after graduate school and had spent the decade since working in nonprofit fundraising for a children's literacy organization. I had spent years imagining her in the kind of offices I once knew, surrounded by the numbers and ambition that had always interested her. Learning that she had walked away from that path and found something that felt like hers, I could not explain the feeling that moved through me. "My mother hated that decision," she said. "Did you?" I asked. "No," she said. "It was the first decision that felt like mine." I told her about the catering job, about Bernadette, about Mr. Kareem's grocery, and the radiator down the hall that clicked 3 times before giving heat. I told her about the legal defense fund without naming the amount. There were silences between us, not empty silences, full ones, the kind that carry 11 years sitting quietly in the room with you. Before she left, she asked if she could come again. I said yes. She came back in June, then again in September. Mr. Kareem began calling her your girl the second time she came into the grocery with me, and she cried in the car afterward, telling me that no one had called her that in years. We were not healed, but we had begun showing up. Once she asked me whether I regretted staying silent. I told her the truth. I regret that I trusted the lie more than I trusted you. She looked at me for a long time after that. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. It was not a perfect ending. 11 years do not vanish because a dead woman finally tells the truth. The floor of the life we might have had together does not simply reappear. Some mornings I still wake at the time I used to wake in a federal prison cell, before I remember where I am. Some evenings I still catch myself calculating things that no longer need calculating. But my daughter had found her way back, and I was still here to open the door. Healing, I have learned, does not arrive the way justice does. Justice can enter a room in a single sentence. A will can be read. A letter can be opened. A truth can stand up after 13 years and announce itself. But healing is quieter than that. It does not care about money. It does not care about vindication. It asks only what you do the next morning and the morning after that. My former wife did not become capable of what she did in one desperate weekend. She became capable of it through years of small permissions, one hidden debt, one avoided conversation, one lie protected because truth felt too expensive, one private fear allowed to grow until it was stronger than her conscience. Character is not what we say when everyone is watching. It is what we do when the only person watching is ourselves. It is the truth we speak before silence becomes easier. It is the courage to stop a lie while it is still small enough to name. Some evenings, when rain taps against the east-facing window of my new apartment, I still hear that Tuesday morning phone call in it. The careful voice of an attorney. The name of my former wife spoken with official weight for the first time in 13 years. But now, when my phone rings, sometimes it is Sienna's name on the screen. And that small, ordinary thing is more than any inheritance could ever be. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. Would you have stayed silent to protect your daughter, the way Henrik did? Or would you have told the truth earlier and trusted her to survive it? I want to know what you would have chosen. Subscribe for more stories about betrayal, survival, and the kind of justice that takes its time but always arrives.